Welcome to the Agile Wire. Brought to you by Wisconsin Agility. We want you to get agile and stay agile. Now here are your hosts, Jeff Bubolz and Chad Beier. And we're recording. All right, kick us off, Jeff.
All right, we got Dave West back on the podcast. Dave is the CEO of Scrum.org. Good friend. Dave, thanks for coming in and doing this podcast with us.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It seems to be so long. I haven't spoken to you on media for a long time. So thank you for inviting me back.
Now,
So
again, we're here to talk about APOM, APOM, which stands for Absolutely Perfect Operating Model. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly what it stands for. Agile Product Operating Model, an evidence-based approach. Fancy title.
Yep. So what is it? Give me the skinny on it here, Dave. How is this different than what we've always done inside of the Agile community?
I think it really is to make product front and center. I mean, I don't know how different it is, but the reality is that I see in most organizations that Agile is implemented in a project culture. And frankly, product becomes something secondary to that, if at all. So you end up with work backlogs, you end up with not being able to find a sprint goal. Your product goal is get work done. You know, it really becomes something focused on work, velocity, etc., which is important. Don't get me wrong. What I'm trying to do with APOM is change that. Let's navigate that change from project to product in a more effective way, and really reposition the narrative about agility into this product culture and product approach.
Yeah. It's just the next evolution, right? Like we see these talks all the time, like Agile is dead. And it's like, well, you only took the first step, and you're expecting it to do so much for you, but you got to take the next step. And I think this really is what it's all about. So, I mean, the thing that I think most people don't do is like you said, they've always put Scrum or anything Agile around a technology, around a department, around a thing they've always done. And it helps to some degree. But they're like, I'm not getting this 10x that I've heard that Scrum can get me, so I don't know if it's working for us. And so they want to try something different. And this is really what we've been talking about. It's like when you have product-based funding, when you focus everything around the product, teams, you're funding the teams. They're long-lived teams. They're cross-functional. Each team can deliver its own increment or an integrated increment that provides value from concept to cash. Like these are things that are huge difference makers. Because you actually feel the ROI that each team makes.
Yeah, I think that there's a number of different angles it sort of approaches the problem of delivering more value to your organization. One of those is ultimately around value. Teams seem to have an inordinately hard time in defining the value of the work that they're doing, measuring the outcomes of those value, even reframing backlog items to be not about update this field on this screen, but more like, what are we trying to get out? Why is that person even using that screen? Why would they do that? So I think there's something around value. I also think that many organizations suffer from people having to do many things at any one time. I was talking to a large consumer packaged goods organization last week, and just for giggles, I always say to this executive, "Go on, show me your schedule." And he shows me, and he's using Outlook, and there's he's meant to be in 4 meetings at the same time. I'm like, how are you in those 4 meetings? He goes, I've been experimenting with cloning. It's very effective. No, he said, apparently, it wasn't. But the point is that that focus, attention. You've got these amazing people working together, which lots of ideas, lots of experience. They're working on customer problems, but then they're sort of working on 100 customer problems in many different contexts. And what that tends to mean is that these teams aren't given the space to be innovative. They're sort of like just going from one fire to this other fire. And they end up not delivering the value that you would expect them to do. So I think that's another very important element of product and the product focus, and it starts at portfolio planning. It simplifies portfolio planning. It means that teams have to actually understand value, purpose, and be directed in a certain way. It means that executives and leaders need to determine really what are they investing in? What are they spending their money on? And I think it can really, really help. And you described it, Jeff, as the next evolution of agility. And I just want to lean into that. I think it's the next evolution of these better working practices to take advantage of the technology that we have at our disposal today. And I think it's sort of like a natural evolution now, just like any change. It's hard. It requires people, culture. It requires all of these things to be in place to really facilitate that, but only in the context of one product. So that means you can potentially incrementally change the organization with a movement to a product model.
Yep. And that approach has worked so well for us in the past with all of our clients. Kind of like an org within an org is kind of how we do it. You take a subset, it's a product, it's centric or customer centric. You could almost put a P&L around it in most cases. And when you have that and you take this area and it's contained, it's maybe like, let's just say 50 people actually doing the work or less. And you just say, hey, let's make this work here on this product. How much do we want to fund this? What experiment so it makes it successful? You can't just go to like, hey, let's just make more money. Like from a business, like you can't say that. You got to be like, no, how are we going to make more money? We have to be very decisive and we have to make calls on like, what is our product strategy and what are we going to do? What are we not going to do? How are we going to have focus? And instead of just doing everything for everyone, we really become like just laser focused on how to deliver value.
I think the other thing that I've noticed, so when I look at agility, and I spend a lot of time poncing around, talking to lots of different organizations, I have a fabulous job. What I see is that one of the reasons why agility has a hard time really describing the value it's delivering in organizations is because of the disconnect between business and technology, or the disconnect between the people that are in these agile teams and the business strategy. And that disconnect, I think, can be ironed out when you have a product strategy, when you start saying, okay, this is our business strategy, and the products aren't the only part of it. I 100%, but they play a key role. They're the goods and services that your organization is providing, either to the external world, people that pay money, external customers or citizens or whatever, or the internal world, people that are working inside your organization, supporting help desk, doing, creating, I don't know if you're insurance, maybe they're underwriting or whatever, all that kind of stuff. So understanding that, and then it allows you to say, okay, so what, considering this business strategy, considering the products we have, what's the intersection? Where should we be investing? Where should we be uninvesting? And it allows to bridge that technology to business divide that I think has plagued and undermined, our ability to deliver value and to justify the value that the technology is delivering. So I think there's a really interesting opportunity with product. And it gives us this, as you said, Jeff, this incremental approach to changing the world.
I think that's so critical too, the incremental approach. I can't think of a time in the last decade or more where, whether it's a conference talk or whether it's a class that we're teaching, where we haven't talked about the shift from project to product. But I think it sort of then falls apart there when organizations take that and go back and they're like faced with a whole organization structured around project. And so they're kind of left with like, okay, I know we should shift, but how do we shift? And I feel like this, it's not a framework, but it's like that bridge. It's that bridging the gap. It's going to show and reveal how do you do it, right? And Dave, we were just talking about, white papers that you're working on right now. And like, I saw this golden sentence in there that I highlighted. it says, a word of caution, if these initiatives are numerous, meaning cross-product initiatives, where you have one initiative that impacts all these different teams across the organization. If those are numerous, then it may indicate that the organization is trying to do too much or the product definition is wrong. And those two things, Jeff and I see everywhere. Most organizations, we always refer to it as a disease that they catch, have way too high levels of WIP. They're working on way too many things at once. I mean, if you're listening, any organization, just think about how many active projects you have in flight right now in your organization. Most organizations answer, big organizations answer in the hundreds. Even small organizations with not that many people answer in, 25 to 50 range. There's just way too much going on at once, which means you're over capacity. And then the product definition being wrong is also at play because we're organized around specialty skill sets instead of actual profit and loss, value-driven teams, right? So those two components, I think, are just so critical.
I wouldn't say that the product definitions are wrong. They're just optimized for something different. They're optimized for making the people very efficient at what they're going to do, like the activities and tasks that need to be done. But they're not optimized for effective value delivery. They're not optimized for being responsive and adaptive and very nimble in a very ever-changing world. And so those things are very disruptive to them. If you want to get more out, you want to deliver more value. Your teams aren't optimized for that. That's the first structural change that kind of has to happen.
Yeah, it is very hard though. I was at FFS, a financial services company, talking. They've adopted product model. They're actually on their second iteration of product model, and that's a key point as well. You kind of never get it right, and the idea that transformation is is a project, just to overuse this term, is a misnomer. You have to be continuously transitioning your organization and looking at what's important. You need to have a team in place that continuously does that. Those people don't necessarily have to be full-time on it, but they need to be continually brought together, frequently looking at flow metrics, value delivered, evidence-based management, whatever it is that's important for you as an organization. But you need to have that. But I was at this financial services company, and they were talking about their first implementation of product model. Now, this is an IT product model, which is, I know, instantly you're like, oh, is something amiss? But it was a transitional step that's very hard to execute on, but to go to the next transitional step. But they built an IT product model. And the reason why they built an IT product model is because they were in this continuous churn. There was just too many things going on. They just couldn't deliver. All the team, they adopted Agile ages ago, and they were still, though they were delivering lots of stuff, but they weren't really seeing the benefit. And what was interesting is their reflection about their first implementation of the product model, the IT product model, was that, oh, well, actually, you've built all these fiefdoms and groups around a business that existed 10 years ago. And that business is no longer there anymore. The business has changed. What's important has changed. The focus has changed. And because of that, their first biggest challenge was a people challenge, because suddenly somebody that had 100 people in his, and it tended to be his organization, suddenly wasn't going to have that, because those 100 people will be distributed to the products and there was loads of politics about that. And so we have to, when you're adopting a product model, and this is the biggest challenge, I think, that organizations, you have to accept that there's a current status, there's a current organization, and that some of it is about delivering and supporting your business, but some of it is about people, politics, power, authority, all stuff. So you need to have a real good understanding of that. And then that allows you then to build a model that might be a bit of a compromise initially, but then you start getting that muscle going, of having quarterly business reviews on the success metrics for the product, having, those sort of, that muscle memory starts getting in place. And then over time, you can start evolving those products to move away from that specialized skills that, because it has always been an important system, therefore it has to be a product, even though it's very hard to define a roadmap, even though it's influenced by 20 other products every 10 minutes. And then you can start asking questions like core and context. What is our strategic differentiator? What is the things that we should be really good at? And you can start asking, hey, we've got this capability. We're currently only supporting our business, but could we sell it to other businesses that are like us? So the AWS example, they had cloud infrastructure that was managed like a product inside Amazon. I'm not sure on purpose or by accident, I don't know. And then suddenly it became a product that they provided. Imagine you're an insurance company that has a really good way of managing claims. So maybe you should bring that product to your competitors, obviously managing it accordingly, maybe having to set up a separate company, whatever. There's massive opportunities. Or in the insurance space, it's more likely you can deliver that capability to your broker network first, and they'll be like, oh, wow, we can handle clients better, or we can handle claims better, or whatever. There's an opportunity to innovate. There's so much technology that we're building that is just such a waste, that's not differentiating, that's not special, that doesn't make your company better. And we're wasting a lot of money maintaining it, supporting it, and thinking about it, which is probably the biggest waste of all.
Yeah. And the more you go through these changes, we're like, hey, we have a new business, or we're going to restructure the teams around this new product definition. The more you do it, the easier it gets. So we've had this client, and the very first time we started working with them, like we did this team self-selection event, and it was like a whole day activity, and everyone was nervous, and there was all this change management we had to do around it, right? Well, a year later, they're like, we want to do that again because we just kind of got out of balance, and we want to like switch this a little bit, tweak this a little bit. And it wasn't such a big deal. Like, didn't need near as much. People weren't nervous. We didn't have to have all these meetings beforehand. It took like a half a day. They had me facilitate both of those. And then the next year, they're like, we want to tweak this again, but I don't think we need you. We got this one on our own now. What do you think about these definitions? So it was just like, oh yeah, here's what I think. What do you guys got it. And then they did it. It was like a couple hours. And now they just keep doing it. This is the normal thing they do, like once a year-ish, depending on what the business needs or whatever are. So like the more you do it and people get comfortable with it, it just becomes not a big deal anymore.
Yeah, so the other thing that's really interesting, Jeff, about that is ownership. So, there's a lot of organizations. Yeah, I mean, I watched my mum. She worked at Sainsbury's for 20 something years, and she worked in the cigarette counter, and they used to deliver the cigarettes at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, which, if you know, in the UK, the cigarette counter also is where you do you get this competition, everybody's buying their lottery tickets, this competition called a lottery. I think we have them in America as well. I always forget. But anyway, we get these lottery tickets, and the cigarettes would be delivered just at the same time as everybody was in line to get their lottery tickets because the drawing's that evening, right? So people would do their shopping, and it was a disaster of epic proportions because cigarettes are really valuable. You can't just leave these boxes sitting there because some geezer will go off and steal them, right? Would you, fair play to them. It's like a currency in prison, I hear. I haven't experienced it myself, but so you have to watch this. So that means somebody has to stop selling lottery tickets to go and do this cigarette thing, and you're like, oh my god. She knew how you could fix this. You could change the delivery time. You could change the personnel. You could streamline. You could move the lottery to a different part of the to a different counter. There's lots of ways. But she felt no ownership of the process. And what I find is that there's a lot of organizations that are like my mum at Sainsbury's, right? And by the way, Sainsbury's is an awesome supermarket in the UK. She loved working there. She's just a little bit annoyed about this one thing. Well, there was a few things, but that was one of them. Anyway, so the point is that people don't feel they have ownership. They don't feel that they can change. They see stupid things happening every day, but they don't, these people are really smart. That's why you hired them. Let's, and they say, well, they can't understand everything. They don't understand. Really? I'd be surprised how smart people, you can, particularly about their work and their business and their customers and their context. Yes, across products, you're going to have to make some decisions that they can't make, but generally. So I think that idea of you're continuously looking, refining, improving, and people actually own that. I think that's another great thing about product model. And I think you've got a platform for sharing the ownership of not only the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, but also how you achieve them. And that's what we talk about in Agile. And to be fair, that's what we see with when you have a situation where one Scrum team can own a product, can own their environment, can own their situation. They're the best situations. They're the best environments. What we're saying is let's take that and just rise it up when you've got teams of teams working towards something. And let's use that mechanism to structure how value is being delivered in your organization. So I think this is the next step of evolution for agility. I think that if you're not looking at your capabilities in terms of products today, you need to start thinking about it. And then when you start thinking about it, start thinking about your portfolio. Don't invest millions of hours and get these huge consultancy organizations to rethink your product model. Just start in a really simple way. Just spend a day, sit down with leaders across the organization, start looking at your capabilities, start mapping them to products, build that first model. Let it sit for a bit, then say, okay, well, we've got a significant initiative at the moment that affects that product. Let's actually try to do it as a product. Let's get those teams together. Let's build that boundary. Let's get those OKRs or objectives or goals or whatever in place. Let's build the business. Let's get those SMEs involved. And then see how it goes.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the whole. We've talked about it a few times. Thinking about it like a profit and loss statement, and like, well, how would you improve things? One often. Probably in response to the question of like a team struggling to get the done very often or things like that, Jeff and I will use this sort of analogous, fictitious example. Imagine that you are no longer an internal team working for this company, but you buy the building across the street and you're going to sell your services that this Scrum team is focused on back to the organization. Would you change the way you're working and get to done if you only get paid when you deliver done value? And instantly everyone's wheels start spinning and they're like, they know immediately probably on 5 things they would improve and change the way they're working because when it's cutthroat business like that, you think differently. And then the challenge is, but I'm not a business owner, I'm an employee, and I don't have as much skin in the game, and my risk-reward equation is different. So some people will just innately want to improve things, and that's awesome. And others, we do have to think about the incentives. And I like that is also part of this. Like you talk about the people side of it, and not like the people like culture, we're going to hold hands and have retrospectives and, no, like we're talking about the people culture, like incentives do matter in an organization. And if you want someone to act like an owner, you've got to think, well, how are you incentivizing them?
And it's visible and invisible incentives. So there's
absolutely
the visible ones you should go after first. I'll be honest. Like if you set a series of KPIs, key performance indicators, at the start of the year, and they attribute 25% of your salary or your bonus or whatever, then you got to make sure they align to the change that you're driving. So if your salary, etc., but invisible incentives are probably as important, and bizarrely, and invisible incentives tend to be about status, authority, future, career progression, etc. And trying to make sure that those incentives are aligned, and working with your HR partner if you're in a large organization, or managers if you're in a smaller organization, to ensure that everything is thought about in that regard. And that can be incredibly challenging because suddenly, people ask very sensible questions like, if I no longer am the bottleneck for this special skill on this legacy system or whatever, how do I show my value? I mean, we've built a system in most organizations where heroes are rewarded. And they should be. Don't get me wrong. They really, really should be. But the reward shouldn't be because they're a bottleneck. Like I remember I was working at TaskTop, and I'm going to tell us, I was chief product officer, and I ran engineering, architecture, product, and it was amazing experience. I learned so much because I got so many things wrong. No, and occasionally something right. And Ken Schwaber was my mentor. Can you imagine that? I was like, every breakfast was literally, I came out limping because it was just like all the things that I was I'm like, why didn't I even think of that? Because he's so good at that. Like, well, that's really interesting, Dave. But have you thought? I'm like, Anyway, what I was trying to do is, so I reviewed the GitHub commits. I got all techie one Friday afternoon over a cup of tea and a jam tart, and I was like, oh, why are most of the commits from one geezer? That can't be good, can it? Anyway, this geezer happened to be probably one of the best software engineers I've ever met in my life. The guy could churn out code. He could use all his fingers on the keyboard. I'm like, it was amazing, and I was like, yeah. But the problem I was like, what happens if he gets hit by and he rode his bike to work? Disaster. I was like, I just pictured him getting taken out by a semi, and then suddenly my productivity and my roadmap collapsing. So I was like, okay, so he's awesome. I love having him here, but he can know. So over time, his objective was to basically work with other people to empower them so that they are delivering more. Now, it didn't go brilliantly, I'm not going to lie, because I ended up having to switch off his GitHub commit rights. That was the only way I could force it because we didn't have bonuses and stuff. But the story sort of illustrates that the fact that he was the hero. Everybody talked to him. He was the greatest. But because of that, he became a bottleneck. His motivation was to be the hero because he was a lovely guy and he wanted to be the go-to person. And he was great. But the problem is I couldn't scale because of him. Because nobody felt that they had the ability to enter stuff, to change stuff. I was like, what? Yeah, so it ended up so how do you stop that? So incentives are a key thought process. And you've got HR partners in these larger organizations or managers that can really help you do that. And asking questions like, hey, so who's the go-to person on that system? If you've got 5 product teams working on that system, how do you deal with that? Are they all going to go to him or her? Or how do we, maybe we introduce an open source model where he's the primary committer? Or maybe we, whatever. We introduce a guild or a chapter where we incentivize that person in transferring skills and we measure it, whatever those things are. But it's important to think holistically about the impact of product in your organization. Because if you don't, exactly what you said happens, Chad. It ends up going, it ends up being lipstick on a pig, as the saying goes, right? You end up sort of doing what you've always done, just renaming it product. And we don't want this stage of Agile to be the same. So you need to think of it holistically. Incentives are a key thing. Organizational structure, which is connected to incentives, is a key element. Thinking about governance. You're spending other people's money. You need to think about what is the transparency that we need. We talk about empowering teams, right? That's a fundamental Agile idea, and it's fundamental to the Agile product operating model. How do you allow them to make decisions? What does a decision really mean? Who needs to be involved? Let's make sure that decision latency is managed appropriately. Thinking about these elements is crucial. But you have a unit of control that isn't the whole organization called the product. You have an ability to experiment on one domain called a product. And that gives you an incredibly powerful change management control, which is great. And then over time, hopefully that product works, and you can, then do that in other parts of the organization.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about AI so I can slip AI into the thumbnail so we get hits. But I just asked ChatGPT to summarize the Agile product operating model in a sentence, and then I had to ask it to shorten it up even more. Just thoughts as we're closing this out. Thoughts on this? The Agile product operating model aligns strategy, people, and investment to maximize value and adaptability. How do we feel about that?
Well, it's a little generic, but in one sentence, I actually really, really like. It's exactly what we're doing. We're optimizing the goods and services provided by your organization and ensuring that it's aligned to the business in a more effective way. And I think that's exactly what we're doing. So I mean, as always, I am surprised, excited, and impressed by our LLMs.
Yep.
All right. This has been a great conversation. Thank you, Dave, for joining us. Is there anything else you want to plug while you're here and you have our audience's ear?
No, not really. I guess I'm doing a lot of webinars on this topic. If you please come, obviously if I've already delivered them, you have to go and watch a recording. That's even better because you can watch it as 1.5 speed. And then you realize that I suddenly sound like somebody out of Peaky Blinders. At a certain speed, it becomes even more apparent, which is very worrying. So recommend start talking about this. Let's start the dialogue. Let's have those conversations. Like recently we had one around portfolio planning, big conversations about that because it has such an impact in organization complexity. We've talked, what is a product? There's a lot of debate. Can a product be an internal product? Can it be a shared service? I would say yes. However, it can be challenging when you do that, and there's some risks that you obviously have to deal with. Let's start getting into these conversations, because the most, as I said earlier, the most successful Scrum teams are ones that have a clear idea of what they're focused on, and the best idea I see is it described as a product.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we'll leave links to past and future places you can go get to the webinars. Otherwise, thanks for your time, Dave. This was a blast talking through this stuff. I know we just recently met in Florida, and we're talking about all kinds of things even beyond this, but it was fun to catch up again.
It was great. Thank you for giving this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
If you found value in today's episode, share this with a friend. Until next time, get agile and stay agile.